Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost in Agreement. Almost in Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostinagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, business, education, books, really anything that gets our attention. My name is Jesse Mayshark. I am co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, joined as always by Scott Barker, also co-publisher and co-founder of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
Doing fine, Jesse. Probably a little bit perkier than you because you had a really tough week this week. So
a lot of late meetings this week, a lot of late writing.
I know. But
you had to stay up to read those things.
Well, yeah, but I could twiddle my thumbs while I was waiting
take
on
a nap.
Your story.
Yeah,
I wish I could take a nap.
And of course, you just came this morning from a big announcement that we're going to be talking about in a couple of minutes. A lot of stuff happened this week. Coming up later in the show, we have an interview with Deborah Fisher, who's the executive director of Tennessee Coalition for Open Government. We thought we would give her a call because there's been some interesting conversation about public forums and public comment at public meetings here locally recently, and she offers some interesting perspectives on all of that. We'll have a little bit of an update on our local state legislative races. Fascinating conversation just last night, Thursday night, at the Knox County School Board about managing collections of library materials, how books get chosen, how books get challenged, how books can be removed. The school district is making some changes there, partly in response to concerns from Moms for Liberty. I'm going to talk about that. I did just mention that Scott just came from an announcement by the Tennessee Department of Transportation about potential future work on and around Interstate 40. We're going to talk about that. But to start us off, if there was one big story out of the last week, actually there have been several big stories, but if there was one, it was the ongoing drama around the Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen's decision to first reject the proposed new county growth plan, and then just days later to reconsider that rejection. So, Scott, we talked last week about that first vote to reject the growth plan, which was a surprise when it happened. This happened last Thursday, the Thursday before Good Friday. Of course, Mayor Glenn Jacobs has been pushing for this amendment to the county growth plan as part of the 2-year-long Advance Knox planning update, which includes several pieces, but all of those pieces depend on the growth plan, which is mandated by the state, as we have talked about. And so Farragut, the Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen rejecting those proposed changes after they had already been approved by Knoxville City Council and Knox County Commission, essentially kind of just put all of that, the entire Advance Knox process on hold, seemingly, because nothing else can really advance out of that unless the growth plan is updated. And so it was not clear, as of last week's episode, what was going to happen there. We had a lot of questions. Everybody had a lot of questions. And this was an eventful week on that front. So what happened was on Monday of this past week, coming back after the holiday weekend and after that Farragut vote, County Mayor Glenn Jacobs called a press conference and said that Knox County was going to declare an impasse in this effort to update the growth plan. And that's something that is allowed for under state law. It gets a little technical in terms of how that impasse can be declared. In the law itself, it suggests that the Growth Policy Coordinating Committee would have to come back. That was the group that Jacobs brought together last fall to consider and make recommendations on these changes, that committee would have to get back together and then decide how to proceed. And if it was rejected again, then an impasse could be declared at that point. However, the county law department and the town of Farragut law department both unearthed a side agreement that those two governments had back in 2001 when the original growth plan, the one that we have still right now, was put together. And that side agreement allows, in the case of, say, Farragut rejecting growth plan or amendments, it allows the county to just go ahead and declare an impasse without having to call the committee back together. There was some legal tussling over that, but that was the determination of the county law department and the Farragut town attorney. So Jacobs said he was going to declare an impasse. If that happened, then the Secretary of State's office would have to appoint basically a panel of mediators who would try to work with the parties and come to an agreement on the growth plan. If that didn't work, then eventually another panel could be called in to just basically impose a solution out of all of it. So all of that had the potential to take these decisions essentially out of local hands and eventually put them in state hands, which nobody was particularly enthusiastic about doing. But Jacobs said that having gone through this 2-year process, and he said having worked extensively with officials in the town of Farragut and so forth, he felt like that was the only route left for the county to take. However, at that Monday press conference, he did also mention that, should the Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen just decide to come back and re-vote on this issue and vote the other way, that would be the easiest and quickest way to resolve it. At the time, he said he didn't really expect that to happen. However, guess what? It turns out that the day after having that press conference, despite his apparent pessimism about that Farragut board, Jacobs and his staff did get in touch with 2 of the 3 members of that board who voted against the plan, met with them individually, gave them presentations, attempted to answer their questions, and so forth. So then this past Wednesday, the Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen had to call a special meeting because under yet another provision of that state law, we're all getting to revisit this state law for the first time in 20 years and remember all of the different pieces. It's a very complicated state law, and we haven't had to think about it much since 2001 when the current plan was adopted. It requires that if one of the parties, Farragut, Knoxville, Knox County, rejects proposed changes to the plan, they have to formally state why. Like, what's the problem with the plan? Because that helps identify, if it does go to arbitration, it helps identify what are the problems here that people want resolved. So the board had that special called meeting to outline their challenges. But it turned out that one of those 2 board members that Jacobs and his staff had talked to, Alderman Scott Meyer, he was sufficiently reassured by the presentation and the personal assurances that he got from county officials about how growth will be handled in the areas, some of the areas right outside the town of Farragut, that he said he is now comfortable and ready to go ahead and support the changes to the growth plan as proposed. And so instead of outlining the objections to the plan, instead what the board did during the Wednesday meeting was to vote to put on the agenda for their meeting this coming week, this coming Thursday, a motion to rescind their prior vote on the growth plan. And that will then open it back up for them to vote on again. And presumably, since Meyer, now says he's in favor, presumably it will pass 3-2, at least 3-2, instead of failing 3-2 as it did the time before. The Farragut meeting was interesting for other reasons too, because there was a lot of drama and a certain amount of shouting from one member of the board, Alderman David White. And it just helped illustrate for those of us, which is honestly probably most of us in Knox County who don't live in Farragut, the dynamics of Farragut town politics. We do not cover Board of Mayor and Alderman meetings a whole lot, only when they have items that, are of sort of broad public interest, because most of what they deal with are sort of small planning issues within the town of Farragut. But that board is an interesting board, and during the 2022 elections, there was a slate of candidates that ran for that board, essentially kind of trying to take over the town government, because it's just a 5-member board. So if you won 3 of the seats on it, you would be in charge, essentially. And there's a group of Farragut residents who are extremely suspicious of current town leadership, very anti-growth and development, both within the town and outside the town, although, of course, within the town is all that they actually control. They don't like that the current leadership, for example, has approved some new apartment complexes in the town of Farragut. People in Farragut not super happy with any kind of multifamily development for various reasons. And really the biggest objections that most people in Farragut, the biggest challenges most people in Farragut have to do with traffic. And that's what a lot of the conversation at these meetings has been about, is like, in this growth plan, is it going to make traffic in Farragut worse? Is it going to do anything to make it better, or at least make it not as bad as it could be with future growth? So that's clearly where a lot of the focus was. But this group of 3 candidates who ran for the board in 2022, were really kind of sounding a lot of, I would say, Trumpish, kind of far right populist. Some of the people involved in it, for example, were also involved in trying to stop the installation of 5G cell phone towers out of fears that they were part of various kinds of conspiracies and that kind of thing. So it's a loud and fairly I don't know what the right word for them is. Let's say populist group of Farragut conservatives. Now, only one member of that slate in 2022 got elected, and that was David White. And so the shouting and finger pointing and various other things that he engaged in during this meeting on Wednesday are kind of a product of long-running tensions and distrusts between him and basically the rest of the board there. And he represents a vocal portion of the community that is very suspicious of their town leadership. He actually ended up, he was against revisiting the issue at all, basically said, we've voted this down, it's done, it's over, it's done with. He argued nonstop with the town attorney, telling him he was interpreting the state law wrong, telling him that basically everything they were doing at Wednesday's meeting was illegal and out of order. And he kept interrupting to the point where the town mayor, Ron Williams, who chairs the meetings, turned to him sort of exasperated and said, "Are you a lawyer?" And David White's response was, "I'm not a lawyer. I can't lie like that," which then prompted, outcries in the audience and other members of the board and whatever. Anyway, he ended up getting up, still holding his microphone and yelling at the rest of the board, and then slammed the microphone down on the table and said, "I'm not staying here while you all break the law." Called the rest of the board suckers and stomped out. And then they went ahead and voted, and they did vote to put that motion to rescind on the agenda. So it was interesting both for, primarily for its impact on this whole big growth policy initiative and the Advance Knox initiative, basically what Farragut had done. Farragut's a town of 25,000 people. And so 3 board members in Farragut had made a decision that was essentially blocking this plan that's going to affect the whole county of almost 500,000 people, because the state law gives the local legislative bodies that power. But it appears, now we're not going to take anything for granted, because
things appeared much differently last week.
Yes, exactly. And so they may appear differently again next week. But at the moment, as we're taping this, it appears that They will come back and vote on that next week, and presumably will approve that plan. So that's the main reason it was interesting. But it was also interesting, Scott, just for kind of the chance to see the dynamics of Farragut local government there. You and I pay a lot of attention to, county commission, city council, the school board. We're pretty familiar with their dynamics. But it is possible that the smallest and least attended to body in the county is also maybe its most colorful.
Well, yeah, I cannot recall a city council member calling a colleague suckers and storming out of a meeting. I don't recall that ever happening.
I can recall a county commissioner doing that. Former county commissioner Charles Bustler stormed out of 2 different meetings back several years ago when Mayor Jacobs was kind of feuding with the county law department, and Bustler was siding with the law department, and he did some of the same things of basically telling all of his colleagues that they were committing crimes, essentially, and he wasn't going to have any part of it. Yeah. And he stormed out of 2 meetings. But even he was not quite at, I mean, the thing that was visible to me, again, as somebody who doesn't go to these meetings much, is like, oh, wow, this one guy really doesn't like these other people on the board, and you kind of got the feeling that was probably mutual.
Well, you said Farragut's a town of 27,000 people, so it's a small town. It's they don't have a police department, they don't have a fire department. It's probably they do have a parks department, so they do have some parks, and they
take care of their roads.
And they take care of their roads, and they have a planning commission, which is probably at least as important as the board of mayor and aldermen. But so it would seem that they don't have as much to argue and fight about as county commission or city of Knoxville, city council. But when they do fight, it's a wonder to behold. So.
Yeah, well, and also, of course, the barrier to entry is much lower because it's a smaller town, and so you can get elected to the board with a few thousand votes, more or less.
Yeah,
and so all sorts of people can get elected. So that was all interesting, and of course, there will be the follow up with the coming meeting next week. I think that for Jacobs, he managed to turn what at first looked like a black eye that, he had spent 2 years, invested all this time and effort in this process, and then was just, kind of brought to heel by 3 aldermen in Farragut. And there were some questions after that initial vote about, had Jacobs done enough? He wasn't at that first meeting where they had that vote. Should he have sat down one-on-one with the alderman before the vote, and that kind of thing. Like, those questions came up. Regardless of whether that might have made a difference in the first vote, he did do those things after the vote. He did meet at least with those 2 aldermen. He said they weren't able to get in touch with David White. Didn't ask him how hard they tried. That might have been an interesting conversation if he'd been able to have it. But he then also was at the Wednesday meeting this week, and at a certain point actually somewhat dramatically interjected into it, because one of the things that Alderman White was saying repeatedly was that if Jacobs has already declared an impasse, there's nothing left for them to talk about, and there was no reason for them to take any action. And so Jacobs, kind of it was a packed meeting room, and Jacobs strode right up to the podium kind of right in the middle of the meeting without actually being recognized by the chair. I think maybe as he approached, Williams did, gesture to him that he could speak.
Well, Jacobs is a big man.
He is a big man.
You're not, if he is striding toward the podium, it would be very easy just to let him get there.
Right.
Not
before he hits you with a folding chair or something. Sorry, I know. We try to not make easy jokes about Jacob's wrestling career. Sometimes you can't help it.
Yeah.
But yeah, he came to the podium and just said, "We have not sent that letter. Just to be clear, we're waiting on the results of this meeting." Just reinforcing to them that, like, what you guys do here tonight is going to determine what we as the county government do. And he then, after the meeting, went out of his way. He had made some sort of vaguely threatening remarks about Farragut after the initial vote, kind of saying that, well, some of their infrastructure priorities in the future might be things that we don't emphasize as much as in some other areas of the county, because if they're saying that, hey, we don't need to update this plan and we're fine with the status quo and the way things are, then maybe that's an area that doesn't need as much county investment as other parts of the county. Which clearly the representatives in Farragut heard that, and they, apart from White, the other people on the board went out of their way to say, we value our partnership with Knox County. We want to, want to get along, and we appreciate everything they do here. And then Jacobs, after the meeting and after it became apparent that it looks like the vote's going to go his way this coming week, said, we love working with the town of Farragut. They're Knox County residents too. Of course, we will look out for their interests and so on and so forth. So he was able to salvage what looked like a bit of an embarrassment politically.
Yeah, I know that Jacobs said he couched his discussions in very, very nice terms. We might have to reprioritize some projects and things like that. But I can guarantee you what the board heard, at least 4 of the members heard, was there's going to be payback. He might not have meant it that way. He might have. He didn't say that, but that's what they heard. They heard there will be payback, and you will not like it.
And this is, of course, a time-honored political technique. There's the famous story that probably many people who follow Tennessee politics know about former Governor Ned McWhorter, who was well known for his willingness to play hardball with state legislators. And the story goes that there was one legislator who was being obstructive on some particular, I don't even remember what the issue was or the initiative was that McWhorter was trying to push through, but one legislator was, creating a problem with it. And so McWhorter called him in for a meeting in his office, and the legislator sits down, and there's a little toy bulldozer on the desk. And McWhorter says to the legislator, "You see that?" And the legislator says, "Yeah." McWhorter says, "If you don't vote for this thing, whatever the thing was, you're not going to see one of those in your county anytime soon." And the legislator got on board real quick.
Yeah.
Because infrastructure projects are things that legislators of all political parties and persuasions want for their communities, because they are things that they hear from their own constituents that they want. And so that is a pretty strong lever. So we'll see, obviously, what happens at the meeting next week. But for now, it looks like that Jacobs has kind of muscled that back on track. After that meeting, when those of us in the media were talking to Jacobs, he had a little news conference. One of the questions that came up to him was, well, obviously the biggest concern here is traffic. And it's true that there isn't really much in the growth plan or even the comprehensive land use plan as it's currently set up that obviously will do a whole lot about traffic in the area. And so the question to Jacobs at that point was, is there any hope or help on the horizon? And he said, well, there is something coming, but I can't talk about it yet. This was on Wednesday. So this morning, Friday morning, that shoe dropped. And Scott, you went to cover this announcement by TDOT, and Jacobs was there and lots of other local officials. So what are they going to do?
Yeah, you were talking about infrastructure projects of kind of, politicians of all persuasions love, and there was a lot of love. They were what the state is planning to do is a multi-year, don't know how much it's going to cost, project to make improvements to I-40/I-75 from the what everybody calls the split in Loudoun County, just across the county line from Farragut to I-640 in West Knoxville, and they're going to make improvements to that whole corridor.
Which is, I think, one of the, if not the most congested stretch of highway in the state.
It's the most congested stretch of I-40 for sure, and one of the most in the state, if not the most. The like traffic counts are 200,000 vehicles a day. I mean, that's,
as you know, if you drive it.
If you drive it, yeah. They're going to they really emphasized that what they're doing is they're taking a comprehensive, from one end to the other, holistic look at this, and they're going to be doing more than just a look, more than a study. They are going to be doing preliminary engineering work. They know they're going to do a couple of things. They know they're going to reconfigure the Campbell Station Road exit, and they know they're going to reconfigure the Watt Road exit. They're going to do something with the way stations out there, or between those two exits. The way stations were built in 60 years ago, and back when that part of Knox County was mostly farms, and now it's sandwiched between the two fastest growing parts of the county. So they're going to be doing that. They're going to be spending $150 million or so on this preliminary engineering work. They don't know exactly how they're going to reconfigure Watt Road, for example. That's what this engineering thing is going to do. They're working on blueprints.
Right. So when we say engineering, to be clear, we're not talking about construction. We're talking about the things that happen before construction.
Yeah, this is all pre-construction stuff. They're also going to be taking a look. One of the things that Butch Ely, the transportation commissioner, emphasized was they are going to be doing this with an eye toward constructing choice lanes, which are the one of the things that Governor Bill Lee pushed through last year was this transportation bill where they can get a private contractor to build lanes, and then there will be a fee, a toll for using those particular lanes, not the whole interstate, just a particular lane or two. And they're going to be looking at how to engineer that into this corridor. And so there's not, like I said, there's not these particular plans, but when you're spending $150 million on engineers to design things, they're going to be designing things. So, and this is a real long-term project, and will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And as far as the actual work, the actual getting the bulldozers out, moving dirt, putting, whatever they do to reconfigure these exits, that will happen as funding is available in the future.
Which will be some other county mayor and some other governor.
Yes. And so that will be so it's not, nobody's going to see anybody any bulldozers at Watt Road anytime soon working to reconfigure the exit. Might be surveyors and engineers out there, but they're not going to be any earth moved. They're also going to be they might even begin looking at right-of-way acquisition if they need to add to the right-of-way. They're going to be looking at, and they could even start buying, the property for the right-of-way. So there's going to be it's not a promise to build something. It is a down payment. They are going to be building something out there to, and they talked about, the various benefits, the, time, for one, since it is so congested. In fact, I was late getting back here, from the press conference because it was pretty congested, coming back eastbound. There's the safety factor. Of course, obviously when you have the more vehicles you have driving on an interstate, the more wrecks you're going to have. Mayor Kincannon brought up the environmental benefits of relieving traffic congestion. So there were making it a more pleasant drive. There's a lot to be said for that. And
making that stretch of I-40 a more pleasant drive is a pretty low bar.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It doesn't take a lot to make it better because it's pretty bad.
But anyway, everybody who was there, and then we had the legislative delegation was all there. Lieutenant Governor McNally was there. Senator Becky Massey, who is the chair of the Transportation Committee. One of the big reasons they're doing this is because she is in that position. She did a lot to push this through, and Senator Briggs was there. A couple of the legislators, Jason Zachary was there. He represents that area in the House. Of course, both mayors, Mayor Jacobs and Mayor Kincannon, were there, and all three mayors were there. People in Farragut are really excited about this because they've been wanting this for a long time. And one of the things that the TDOT officials pointed out was, these two exits, the Campbell Station and Walt Road exits, are the only ones on that stretch of I-40 that have not been improved. Mm-hmm. So they're overdue, and there was a lot of excitement among local officials. They know that this is a huge investment. This is a once in a generation investment, probably, I think you could say. And the last time we had a once in a generation investment, it didn't get built. That was the bypass that was going to go up through Hardin Valley, which now is full of houses. So, but they all know it's a big investment, and they are excited that the state's moving forward with it. But you got to kind of temper that a little bit because this could be 10 years, be 15 years. And like I said, it depends on the money that's available in the future under other governors, under new legislators and all that. So
yeah, and I think if you take this combined with the changes to the county growth plan and the comprehensive land use plan that they're putting together, which also at least theoretically gesture at, if not improving current traffic conditions, maybe at least mitigating the impact of future growth, making it less worse than it might be without it. But that's the thing, is that all of these things don't change the reality that it is, in fact, very difficult to drive in, out, and through those densely populated areas of West Knox County right now, and it is almost certainly going to get worse and not better in the near term because there's continuing to be growth and continuing to be development out there. And while this certainly sounds sort of promising in a long-term sense, if you live out there, you probably prefer the state to be investing in this to them not investing in it. Like driving in West Knox County is still going to be bad for the foreseeable future.
Yeah. The these things take time. It takes time to build a road or repair a road. It's not, it's not something that, people just go out and start slapping down asphalt and saying it's done. There's a lot to it. And
was there any discussion about because that bypass idea has resurfaced in recent years with Massey, among others, talking about that they also need to look at revisiting the idea of, a bypass that would pull traffic off of 75 and maybe loop it all the way around Knox County or something. Did anybody ask about that or say anything about it?
Will Reed, who's he's kind of the chief engineer for TDOT, was saying that didn't say that they were considered that specifically, but said they would be looking at all of the studies that have been done and all of the plans that have been drawn up in the past, and they're not counting anything out just automatically. However, the discussion was centered totally on that stretch of I-40.
Right. All right. Well, I guess we'll have plenty of time to prepare for any work that might happen out there.
This will give us something to talk about for the next 5, 6, 7 years probably.
And the other thing to think about is if and when they do come to construction out there, even if that construction ultimately makes traffic flow better, as we know from our long experience with Alcoa Highway in the last decade or so, in the near term, it will make it more difficult.
Oh, yes. There's, we didn't even, no one even talked about what it would be like while they were working on the project.
Might be a good time to do one of those house swap things where you go and live in somebody's house in Italy for 5 years while they come live in yours. Then you can come back when that work's done. All right. Well, interesting stuff. As I mentioned earlier, the school board last night had a presentation on library collection management. It's funny. On the agenda, that's literally what it says, presentation on library collection management. Not a super exciting sounding agenda item in and of itself. However, of course, it comes with a context, and the context is that our local chapter of Moms for Liberty, the conservative Christian activist group, has for the last several months been putting pressure on the school board, really kind of following a playbook that group and other conservative activists have used around the country of identifying specific books in school libraries that they find objectionable, often for sexual content, drug content, various other kinds of topics that they think are too mature for students. And we're mostly talking about high school students here. Most of the books that are being objected to, if they're available in school libraries, are in high school libraries. They're not in elementary school libraries. But the school board looked at their book policy, specifically the policy on how people who object to various materials can challenge it a few months ago, and decided that they felt like the policy was working pretty well. They didn't choose to make any changes to the policy. However, what Superintendent John Ryswick's administration has done, and clearly in response to these concerns being raised, is they announced Thursday night that they're going to be adding a couple of new layers of review to their whole library system. And so those are at the school level and at the district level. At the school level, what they're going to do is form every school in the county, because all of our schools have school libraries. Every school in the county is going to have a school library council, which will be made up of the school librarian, the principal, a classroom teacher, a school counselor, and a parent or guardian representative. So that's really the new element of this. Their existing policies and practices call for the school librarian to work with principals, teachers, and students in building the collection, but adding that parent representative to these councils, that's kind of the new part of this, is giving a parent voice on those councils. And what those councils will be involved in doing is working with the librarian as they consider which books to add to the school collection, which books to maybe remove, and to be clear, most books that are removed from school libraries are not because they've been challenged for anything. Libraries, not just school libraries, libraries of all sorts, are constantly adding new books and removing older books, partly to make room on the shelves, but also because, books have a certain lifespan, both physically, they get old and degraded or damaged, but also, a book or a series of books that's super popular with middle schoolers in, 2024 is probably not going to be super popular with middle schoolers in 2034. And so there's a certain amount of just natural churn that happens. And these library councils would be involved. It'll be, the way it was presented was a collaborative effort to support the librarians. They were at pains to say that they're not trying to take power or disrespect the expertise of school librarians, but that having these other perspectives, they said, will help mitigate that. And among other things, it would take a little bit of the target off of the librarians themselves. Librarians have been subjected to fairly abusive political rhetoric in many parts of the country, including in our own state, where country singer John Rich, who for whatever reason was testifying to the state legislature. It's interesting, the people who show up to testify to the state legislature. He compared librarians last year to predators in white vans lurking outside schools trying to, there's this narrative out there that school librarians are involved in, some sort of nefarious conspiracy to target children and groom them for, various kinds of things. So that having those school councils, if a decision is made that there is an objection to, it that won't just fall back to the librarian. It'll be like, well, we have this council and they've considered this and this is what they think, and it includes parent, representation and so forth. Yeah. One thing that has yet to be decided there, because I asked about it after the meeting, is how exactly those parents are going to be named and who those parents are going to be, because there was a big crowd at Thursday's school board meeting of students, parents, teachers who came out to talk about this. The majority of the crowd who turned out Thursday were very much in support of school libraries and librarians, and basically asked the school board, don't make any changes to your collections, don't listen to Moms for Liberty and the other groups who were pushing you to restrict certain kinds of books or whatever. There were more of those voices than there were from the Moms for Liberty group, although the Moms for Liberty group was there, and their chair and vice chair, Sherry Super and Sherry Garrett, both addressed the school board, and they made their own case. Sherry Super used her 3 minutes to talk not so much about Knox County, but to give a very ideologically driven, let's say, brief history of the academic discipline of queer theory, which is a real academic discipline. You can Google it, look it up. But she basically said that what queer theory actually is again, this kind of conspiracy to sexualize children and, I don't know, make them gay or trans or, whatever the things that people imagine school librarians are doing. She said that queer theory has infiltrated the entire K-12 curriculum. I have to say, I am a parent of a Knox County student, and I'm not aware of this. The classes that he's taking, have not seen any real evidence of. I do actually know what queer theory is. I'm not really seeing a whole lot of that in what's coming home. Nevertheless, that was the tone and tenor of the conversation. But all that to say, whoever that parent on those councils are could make a bit of a difference, because there were some parents at Thursday's meeting who, including Sherry Super and others, who were clearly very strongly on the side of wanting to take lots of books out of libraries. There were also several parents who spoke who were 100% opposed to that. And so how the schools are going to decide which parent representative to have to kind of speak for all of the parents in that particular school community seems like it'll be an interesting process. They're also forming at the district level another set of committees called sensitive title review committees. And there will be one of these for each school level, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. And those will be made up entirely of current school librarians. And they will be panels at each level of 5 librarians who will be taking what they called a proactive look at specific titles and books that are in the libraries that they know have been controversial or have maybe been challenged elsewhere. And this is a bit of a change because right now, for a book to even come up for consideration, there has to be an actual complaint filed about it, and only a parent, student, or staff member can actually file that complaint. There's no mechanism, there hasn't been a mechanism for the school administration to say, well, we know this particular book is controversial, let's just go ahead and take a look at it and see what we think of it, absent that complaint. So now there will be, and those committees will just kind of work through titles that have been identified. I mean, it's not very hard to identify contentious titles. You can just Google lists of books that are challenged a lot, which is basically what Moms for Liberty has done here. Yeah. They have Googled a couple of lists compiled by very conservative national organizations of books that those organizations say are objectionable, and they've just gone through and said, okay, here's the ones of these that are in Knox County libraries. And so I don't know if these sensitive title committees are going to be relying just on those kinds of lists or on other kinds of materials generated by, librarian associations or whatever. They identified the first 3 that they're going to look at. At the elementary school library level, they're going to be looking at a book called The Tales Dark and Grim, which is the first book in a series of books that kind of are modernized retellings of fairy tales with, a certain amount of more explicit violence and so forth than maybe are in the originals. Although if you've ever read the original Grimm fairy tales,
they're pretty,
not the Disney versions, let me tell you.
there's some violence in there.
They are dark and grim both. At the middle school level, they're going to be looking at a book called Hey Kiddo, which has been challenged in some school districts across the state. It is a book for young adults, aimed at a young adult audience, but it includes it's a family story, and it's a family that has some struggles with addiction and some other, difficult issues that real people and real students and children do, in fact, encounter in their real daily lives. And then at the high school level, they're going to look at the book Genderqueer, which is probably the most challenged book in America the last 4 or 5 years. It's a very personal memoir by its author, Maya Kobabe, who said that in growing up, and Kobabe identifies as non-binary, but while they were growing up, they never felt comfortable identifying, as a girl, that the things that were expected that they were supposed to respond to or like or whatever weren't things they responded to. And it was actually, and there's a good, which in our story about this meeting, we linked to this New York Times profile of Kobabe. It's really interesting. I suggest that anybody who's at all interested in this go and give that a read for some context, because it was this book, it's a graphic novel, but it was really written very much out of their own personal experience and trying to make sense of it, and was written with the hope of providing some context and reference for other people who may be experiencing the same thing. And Kobabe said in that article that that's what they hear from students across the country, that, thank you for, and Kobabe's argument was that when you say you want to remove this book, what you're doing is telling anybody who can relate to those feelings and experiences, we don't want your story told, and we don't want it to be available to other people to hear. So those are going to be the first 3 reviews. Now, whether these particular moves are sufficient to kind of quiet down this conversation, I think remains to be seen. Board Vice Chair Steve Triplett, who has been the strongest ally of the Moms for Liberty group on the school board, he's kind of the most religious conservative of a handful of more or less religious conservative board members. He's a graduate of fundamentalist Crown College here in Powell. And he was a little standoffish with this proposal, basically saying, well, if you're not changing anything else and you're just applying the same standards you have, and these books have already been approved once, how do we know that they won't just get approved again? Because Triplett was pretty straightforward about what he wants is he wants these books gone. And by these books, it's not just sort of one list, just kind of like anything. It seemed like on the one hand, he was saying, I don't want to get rid of every book that talks about sex. But it wasn't really clear what other parameters he had in mind. What was clear was that in Triplett's mind, what we need to do is get rid of a bunch of books that are in our school libraries. He's basically said that. He thinks that. And if that is not the result of, and that's also what the Moms for Liberty group wants, they want books gone from libraries, period. And they want to be able to flag books, again, using these lists generated by these national, very conservative groups. And, they want to be able to identify those and have those go in and then have those books removed. They're straightforward about that. That's what they want. If that doesn't happen as a result of these reviews, it's a little hard for me to see them being satisfied with the outcome. Now, I thought one of the more interesting comments made, and it was sort of toward the end of the conversation, Reverend John Butler, who is the only pastor on the school board, responded to some of the religious tinged arguments that Triplett had made, and said that, these issues of morality are complex, even, and he said that even in his own congregation, you can't say that church members agree on absolutely everything, or that there's one absolute truth about all of these complex issues, because people have different experiences, people have different points of view. And the other thing Butler said was that, we have a policy already, we have a process. Okay, we're making some changes to that process a little bit. Fine. Can we just let that process do what it does? It's not clear that there's actually any real problems here, since for the noise that's been made about by the Moms for Liberty group, there have been actually very, very few book challenges made by parents. It was interesting, in the people who stood up and spoke, a whole bunch of students, especially students from West High School, where they have a library ambassadors program, stood up and spoke very I should say, articulately and passionately about the importance of freedom of information, and that libraries are a great place for students to learn about themselves and the world and other people, and all of those things. And the parents who stood up and spoke, and whatever, the people on the other, there were not one single student stood up and spoke and said, I have been harmed by books in Knox County Schools. I accidentally came across this book and it has disturbed me and traumatized me. None of that. There's really been nothing presented that any of this is actually a problem in Knox County Schools or for Knox County families. This is all very clearly being driven by national politics. These lists of books are coming from national conservative groups. Moms for Liberty itself, although they have a local chapter, they are a national conservative group. And so it feels more like an outside political fight that's being imposed on the school board. And that was kind of what Butler was getting at, that, there's going to be people who are mad about this stuff no matter what we do. And we can, spend hours talking about this every month if we want to. And he made clear that he does not want to do that, and kind of said, let's just let the process do what it does and leave it alone.
One thing that is does, you could on the one hand say, well, they kind of caved a little bit, gave some, parents are going to be involved in these committees. There's going to be one parent in a 5 to 7 member committee when everybody else is a school is somebody who works in the school. So any decision that they come to, even if they decide to remove a book, won't be a rash decision. It's not, it would, you would think, just the way it's set up, that it would be a considered, decision, one way or the other. And, so, I don't think that it's, the I definitely don't think it was a big victory for Moms for Liberty to get this done.
No, they seemed a little bit muted about it. I mean, I think it's really going to come down to what the results of this are. Yeah. But like you say, whatever the results are, there will be a basis for it. And Sarah Searles, who's the academic resources coordinator for library media services for the school system, she's the one who made the presentation and kind of rolled out these new committees and everything. She put it in terms of they're building capacity to make complex decisions. She said these are complex issues. Nobody is saying that issues of gender or how we talk about race or how we talk about experiences like growing up in a family with addiction and things like that. Like, these are hard things. And that's why we have these conversations about them, because they're hard. They're hard things for people to live through, and they can be hard things for people to talk about. They can be hard things for parents to feel comfortable talking to their students or their children about, or knowing that their children are hearing about. And so by expanding the pool a little bit, adding these extra layers of review, she said that what they're really trying to do is build a system that can take seriously the complexity of these issues, take seriously the concerns that people have about them, and take seriously the perspectives of the students who they serve, which, of course, that's what this is all about, right? These are school libraries. They are libraries for students. They are there to provide resources and support for students. And part of the point that board member Daniel Watson made was that Knox County is a very large district. It has 90 schools. It has 59,000 students. It has people with a dramatic range of different perspectives, background, life experiences. And so the fact that any given book or any given material in a school library is uncomfortable or challenging or, unpleasant for some people, and that some people don't want their kids to have access to it, doesn't necessarily mean, certainly doesn't mean that everybody else is going to feel or respond the same way. And one thing that Searles said is that through all of this, their focus continues to be when there is a problem, when somebody does have an issue with a book or a topic, they try to resolve that as narrowly as possible at the closest level to the student. And so most often what that takes the form of, a parent can contact a school librarian and say, I don't want, I know this material is in the school library and I don't want my kid to be able to check it out. You can do that. You can already opt your kid out. That was one parent who's also a teacher who spoke at the meeting said, if I don't want my son to read a book, he's not going to read the book, or to the degree that you can control it as a parent, because as those of us who are parents all know, you also can't control everything your kids have access to, no matter how hard you try. But she said she would not take it upon herself to say that because she doesn't want her son to read that book, that no child in Knox County should be able to read that book, because she said that's not her role as a parent. Her role as a parent is to parent her kids, not everybody else's. So, the board doesn't actually have to vote on any of this, because the creation of these committees was an administrative move done within their existing policies. And I definitely got the sense that part of this was to show that, yes, we're taking this seriously and to listen to the concerns. Part of it also, I think, was hoping, as Butler was hoping, to just kind of tamp this down and not have it be something that every 3 months some group is coming back with some new book that they're upset about, and we go through this whole rigmarole. That they can say, look, we have a process, let the process work. But as I said, what the outcome of those processes are, what the outcome of those reviews are, will probably determine a lot about how much we hear about all of this in the future. I do not expect the question of children having access to objectionable materials to go away, because I think that issue has been around for a long time.
It has been around for a long time, and you're right, it won't go away. It's one of those, it might take a different form, but it won't go away.
One thing I always like to remind people is that Socrates, the founder of Western philosophy, the grandfather of much of our Western tradition, that conservatives, among others, really like to champion. Do you remember how Socrates died? Socrates was put to death. He was compelled to drink poison because he was a negative influence on the youth of Athens. So, yeah, it's an old fight. And, in general, the people and the materials and the books and so forth that are censored in one era often go on to be seen very differently in later era. All right, a couple things to talk about at the state legislature. First of all, we had the filing deadline pass on Thursday for candidates for state and federal office. And we talked about this a little bit last week. State Rep Gloria Johnson is running for reelection to her House seat in District 90. She is also running for the U.S. Senate, she's in the Democratic primary in August, hoping to challenge Senator Marsha Blackburn in November. We had talked about this bill in the state legislature that had been proposed by two Knox County Republicans, Senator Richard Briggs and Representative Dave Wright, that would prohibit any candidate from appearing on the same ballot for two different offices. And had that bill passed before and been signed by the governor before this past Thursday's deadline, it probably, there might have been a legal challenge, but it probably would have affected this year's races, and it would have meant that Johnson maybe could not run for both of those offices at the same time. However, that bill has not yet passed. It passed in the Senate back in February. It has been held up in the House, not because House Republicans are trying to protect Gloria Johnson, Lord knows, but because there were a bunch of House Republicans who had concerns about its possible effects on elected officials in their own districts who may run for or even hold multiple offices in some cases.
Yeah, it's pretty common in rural counties for someone to say be on a city council within that county and be on the school board.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's very common for things like that to happen.
And so that has just been bottled up. It hasn't been voted down yet, but it hasn't come out of the House. It did not pass before the deadline, so the likelihood that could apply to this year's elections seems very slim. So that is out of the way as a concern for Johnson. And also, interestingly, Johnson is the only incumbent of either party in Knox County this year running unopposed. So not only did the Republicans in the House not vote to complicate her life, the local Republican Party is not fielding a challenger to her at all. And she has no Democratic opposition in the primary, which means that even though she's running for two offices, she's basically free from now until the election in November, to assuming she wins the Democratic primary for the Senate seat, to focus on that Senate race without having to worry about defending her home turf at all.
Yeah, that's true. She doesn't have to worry about that. She doesn't have to worry about. I mean, one of the things that was kind of interesting is as a legislator, she could not raise reelection funds during the session, but as a Senate candidate, she could raise money for her Senate campaign. Of course, that's
judging by the emails that I see.
But the making sure you keep that straight. There's not it'd be very easy. I would have imagined that there would have been Republicans poring over her campaign finance documents more than they normally would, and but she doesn't have to worry about that. She can move on. So there's and she's secure in knowing that she's got if she she can not worry about whether she she can go all out after Blackburn, and she doesn't have to worry about it, because if she doesn't, she's got a job.
Yep, that's right.
So I got two questions here, guys, because I'm curious, and this doesn't necessarily apply to Gloria, but just on a functional basis. Now, a campaign can donate to another campaign in practice. That's not an abnormal thing. People do it all the time. So when Gloria is allowed to fundraise as a state legislative candidate, can her campaign take those funds and then donate them to her other campaign? is this, again, I'm not accusing Gloria by any means of this. It's just curiosity that came up in thinking through the process here. Would it then therefore kind of give her an option to get double donations from certain people who wanted to max out because they could give it to her state campaign as well as her federal campaign, and then her state campaign can give it to her federal campaign? Or is her state campaign maxed?
I don't actually know the answer to that question, because it's an unusual enough situation to have somebody running for these two offices at the same time.
The compass guy.
Yes.
So we'll have to make some inquiries.
We'll check that out. Yeah, I mean, I see what you mean. That if I give the maximum amount to her Senate campaign, and I don't know what the federal limit is, it's pretty high. But then I give money to her state account,
right,
or state campaign account, and then she decides to move it up. Yeah, that is I could see where that could be construed as a way of getting around.
Again, not accusing, just a thought experiment that came to mind. And then the second part I was thinking about is, we're pretty confident that if this law gets passed that kills the double run, it's too late. Like, we're pretty confident. Like, they could figure out some way to make it happen anyway. So theoretically, what would happen if this unopposed candidate drops out right now to pursue the other one because they make her, for lack of a better word? Like, what would happen to the District 90 race if there's no candidate running, if she needs to drop out to keep the Senate race alive?
I believe the party... Well, we still haven't had the primary yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another question I'm not totally sure on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Damn it, Seth, stop asking us questions we don't know the answers to.
Yeah, really.
You're impinging on our all-knowing aura.
Well, I'm trying to let the people know that you're real people too. I'm trying to.
If anybody who's listening to this has answers to these, go ahead and email us and let us know. But we can check with election officials and figure out.
Right. It's certainly a weird, like, super specific, super rare case that probably not many people have put some thought into yet, so I don't blame you guys for not knowing. But it was just kind of like, as you guys were discussing, it came to me as curiosities.
Well, she would still hold the District 90 seat.
Right.
Up until, but you're right, as far as getting on the ballot and who the voters could vote for in November.
Right.
That would be an interesting question.
Yep. No.
Well, thanks for humoring me.
We can ask and find out. The other thing I wanted to mention as far as the legislature goes is that the other week talked a little bit about the proposed social media age verification bill that, if it passes, looks like it's going to require everybody who uses any social media in Tennessee to verify their age in one way or another. That bill, which has already passed the House, is up for a vote in the Senate, the state Senate, on Monday, the 8th. So by next week, we may know if that looks like it's going to happen or not. All right, Scott, let's talk about public forum a little bit. We have an interview coming up with Deborah Fisher of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, and we thought we would call her because this is something that comes up a lot. You and I cover a lot of public meetings, and all of those public meetings have public forums of one kind or another where members of the public can show up and sign up and speak, sometimes only about items that are on the agenda, sometimes about anything they want. Sometimes it depends on whether they want to sign up for the public forum at the beginning of the meeting or the end of the meeting. All of our local bodies have slightly different ways of dealing with this, but we had a couple of issues come up just this week. The school board voted on a small change to its own public forum policy that slightly broadens the authority of the board chair to cut off speakers at public forum if they are being harassing or if they are being frivolous, was the word that was used, because that comes from an actual legal decision, which we'll talk about with Deborah in our interview. But basically just giving a little bit more leeway to the board chair, vice chair, to keep people on topic and to shut them down if they're not. And that very issue came up this week at City Council, right?
Yeah, it sure did. Little context here. 2 weeks prior to that, the March 19th meeting, I believe it was, which was when they considered the most recent resolution on the conflict in Gaza at the end of the meeting during the public forum session at City Council. And it's a time where you can talk about anything. There was a guy named Tom Ruggles who started speaking. He's obviously angry at City Council for not taking action on the resolution. And he turned his back to the council and started addressing the crowd rather than council. And Mayor Kincannon, who chairs the meeting, banged her gavel and told him to come to order, that he was out of order and all that stuff. And he kept doing it, kept doing it, kept doing it. Finally, she told him to leave, and then had 2 police officers who came and escorted him out. Well, last week, at the meeting, he tried a different tack. He and several others. It was kind of interesting, but at city council meetings, you can speak to an agenda item, or you can wait till public forum at the very end. If you wait to public forum, you can talk about anything you want. Doesn't matter. But if you speak to an agenda item, you are supposed to stay on topic and talk about that agenda item. And Ruggles and his others in his orbit signed up to speak on just about every agenda item. And what they would do is they would say, you kind of nod to the item at hand and then try to connect it to what's going on in Gaza. For example, there was a resolution or an ordinance that would change the schedule for the fire department to maintain its records, keep and maintain its records. Got up and said, well, that's very important. You keep to keep good records, especially when you're in a public safety agency. That all sounds well and good, and then kind of went just like the health ministry in Gaza does, and keeping track of the X number of people who've been murdered there and everything. And he started going there. Kincannon, banged the gavel down, said, "You got to stay on topic. And that went on almost every single agenda item that went on like that. So it was kind of and at times some of the people who spoke admitted, I don't know anything about what I'm talking about here. I mean, about the issue before the city, but here's how it relates to Gaza. And it was very interesting. Of course, at the end, in the open public forum session, people did address Gaza. So, which was fine. It's when you're supposed to if it's not on the agenda. So, but it was a tactic that was not looked upon kindly by most people on council. Most of the council members appeared to be quite annoyed.
Not least because it probably extended the length of the meeting considerably. Yeah,
I mean, that was one of the things. They had 2 items on the agenda originally that would have generated quite a bit of discussion. One of them, quite a bit of discussion. And they one of them was postponed. The other one was withdrawn altogether. And if the speakers who addressed the each agenda item had not done that, meeting probably wouldn't have lasted an hour. Mm-hmm. But it lasted more than 2.
Yeah. So. Well, and it's interesting because this is something that comes up from sort of all political sides. It's not really an ideological issue because those public forums are used regularly they're used by lots of people to talk about lots of things, but they've long been a vehicle for various kinds of political activists to show up and, make their case on whatever the issue is they want to talk about. And so, like during the COVID pandemic, we saw a whole lot of activity from the right, from conservative groups and people showing up and arguing against mask mandates and various other kinds of public health measures. And then more recently, we've seen activists from the left trying to bring attention to suffering of Palestinian people in Gaza. So it's more a tactic than it is, and it doesn't really have to do with people's politics or the issues. Yeah. And the public forums can be used for that, especially because most of our bodies have public forums. I mean, you can speak to the individual agenda items, as you say, but then there's also the public forum where you can kind of, if you want to go to city council every 2 weeks and make a speech about climate change or the Bible or really anything else you want to talk about, as long as you don't violate, some standards of decorum.
There's a gentleman who comes to just about every city council meeting and accuses the fire department of burning down businesses.
Right.
you can really talk about just about anything at public forum, and that is designed to be that place, but
managing it and doing that while also trying to keep a meeting on track and get the things done that you're trying to get done. I mean, this is a challenge we see all of our bodies go through.
And really it is kind of, sometimes you might be able to make kind of a connection that way. There were a couple of times where you could say, okay, that comes close to addressing the city issue by using an example from somewhere else, but most of these they didn't. There's a road right-of-way closure, unused right-of-way closure, which there's no way to really legitimately connect that to God, and they tried. Right. And but there again, that can be construed as being content restriction too. I mean, because if you'd made an example comparing that to a road closure in Chattanooga, everything's okay, But so anyway, it's kind of an interesting tactic that was used and used throughout the meeting. I've been to meetings where people have used similar tactic once, but not systematically through the whole meeting. So it was kind of interesting.
Right. Well, and the legalities around all of this are somewhat complex because they involve First Amendment rights and also some state laws. And we thought this was a good opportunity to talk to Deborah Fisher at TCOG, because these are some of the issues that organization spends a lot of time focused on. And we had a good conversation with her about both what is required by laws and by the Constitution as far as these public forums go, what discretion our bodies have, and what are some of the best practices that she herself, as a specialist in open government, would recommend. So let's go to that interview. Okay, joining us this week on the podcast is Deborah Fisher, Executive Director of the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government, which is a nonprofit based in Nashville that advocates for government transparency, open records, open meetings, making sure that we all have access to the workings of our local and state government. So, Deborah, thanks a lot for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse, for having me.
So we thought it would be good to have you on to talk about public forums in particular, because this seems like something that comes up a lot. I mean, I feel like in my decades of watching government meetings, this is sort of one of those issues that most legislative bodies deal with in one way or another. But my sense, and this was the first question I was going to ask you, is that the focus on this has been heightened. I feel like since the pandemic, there were a lot of things that happened then that pushed people on various sides of the political spectrum to focus more on people having access to public forums. Is that a fair characterization, that this has been a more heightened conversation in recent years?
I do think public comment periods have been of more interest. And you're right, during COVID, particularly during the mask mandates, there were people concerned about that. But there have been a host of issues that have caused people to turn up at their city councils and school boards. School boards seem to always be at the center of public comment issues that we've seen reach the courts, but it certainly happens in all governing body meetings.
Well, could you maybe give us a little bit of legal grounding here? Because I know that's actually changed in the last few years, and the legislature strengthened the requirement for public forums at public meetings. What is the situation now in Tennessee if you are a school board, city council, county commission in terms of allowing public comment?
Right. Well, in 2023, you said the legislature strengthened public comment periods, but before 2023, the state law did not require that governing bodies have public comment periods, except for certain situations. You know, there were public hearings required for certain things. But in general, governing bodies were not required by state law to have public comment periods, although many, of course, have had them traditionally. So that law requires that the governing body set aside a time for public comment and it has to at least set aside time for matters that are germane to the items on the agenda. You know, they can go beyond that, but the state law says that's your bar right there. And it allows them to restrict the length of the period for the public comments, and such as, and they can restrict the number of speakers or the length of time for each speaker. And the law also allows the governing body, if they want to require people to sign up in advance. So those are just some general parameters on the 2023 law.
And when there are conflicts, when you hear from people about conflicts over public comment, what do those tend to take the form of? What are the things that people fight about?
Well, some people have complained about having to sign up in advance. They may be used to previous rules where they could just come in person and maybe sign a sheet to sign up to talk. So I think we've seen some governing bodies require that you sign up, a day ahead, either online or something like that. So the sign up procedures sometimes frustrate people if those are required and like before the meeting, and you can't do it, when you get there. And then the other things, some people become frustrated if they're limited to the amount of time that they can speak. They don't understand why they only get 3 minutes, and while somebody else may get a longer time, and they feel like that they need more time to explain their point to whatever board that they're talking to. And then I have certainly seen and seen video of situations where a governing body or a chairman or chairwoman will shut down a public speaker almost because they're upset about what they're saying. And there have been some pretty egregious situations, because I think at times there becomes, people get mad at each other in these meetings. Things are said, they feel like they're being criticized unfairly or maybe personally attacked. And whether or not that's the case, they can just say, "You're out of order," and, gavel them out. And I've seen people removed from meetings. And sometimes, it appears to me that was a definite overreaction, by the chair. And sometimes you can see where the citizen also went over the line. So, those kind of conflicts are what come up, and maybe it's understandable, especially when it involves your children in school, or maybe your property, some kind of financial interest, and some kind of zoning issue or something. So, emotions can get high.
Scott, did you have anything you wanted to?
Absolutely, they can. One thing that was going to ask you about is you said earlier that the legislature's action in 2023 said that bodies can require that the speakers stay on topic. And what is, that can sound a little bit like content restriction. So talk about content restriction and when it can be restricted and when it can't be.
Right. And I think that state law in 2023 was very carefully vetted to kind of agree with court decisions on, what is a free speech violation. So in limited public forum, which is what a school board meeting or a county commission meeting would be, the governing body can make reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. They can make restrictions around, speech. It's not like you're out on the sidewalk and you can say anything you want, but the government does have an interest in conducting a meeting in which their business, can get done. And so, in terms of content about what people can speak about, certainly some governing bodies allow people to talk about things that are not on the agenda because it may be coming up on an upcoming agenda. They may have a time, reserved to hear from people about just issues related to the government. But there have been court cases, and I generally, for us, we would look at the Sixth Circuit Court on what they say, because that's what governs Tennessee, or certainly the Supreme Court. But the Sixth Circuit usually has a lot of has some cases that are important and for us. And in general, the governing body would run into problems if they're discriminating based on viewpoint, right? So if they are not allowing people to speak because they, let's say, favor a certain book, that they want to keep in the library, but they're allowing the people to speak who want to get that book out of the library, then that would be viewpoint discrimination. But if they were saying, we're only going to allow people to talk about items on the agenda and you have to stay relevant to the agenda, that could be considered okay. Because, the school board has a, right to kind of determine, or whatever governing body to determine, generally what content we're not going to, talk about in general, because it's irrelevant to what we do or whatever, or if it's not relevant to this particular meeting.
Well, and so to that point, our school board right now is looking at adding a new clause to their public forum policy, which they seem to revisit every 6 months. One of the school board members just this week said he thought the public forum policy was the one policy that they had revisited the most during his 4 years on the board. It's something they talk about a lot. But what they're looking at doing now is just adding a couple of words that speakers could be cut off by the chair for making comments that are harassing, frivolous, or repetitive. And there was some, and apparently that language comes from a court decision, which is what their lawyer told them. That's why he felt, confident in adding it to the policy. But there was some discussion about what that means. And he said that his interpretation of frivolous was exactly that, something not related or relevant to. So if you're coming to the school board and you want to talk about Gaza, for example, that could be considered frivolous because the school board is not considering anything to do with Gaza on its agenda.
Yeah, that's a good example. And unless there's something about kids in school from Gaza, I don't know. But in general, no, the war between Hamas and Israel is not something your school board is going to have a lot of influence over, right? So, that would seem to be just, way off topic. I know the case that he's talking about, it was one from 2009, and it involved the Jefferson County School Board, so not too far and from you. And it had to do with parents who were upset about their sons who were dismissed from a football team. And they had, one of the moms had signed up. She wanted to get on the public comment period and her topic was football, signed up in advance. And then, as it turned out, the attorney for the parents spoke and was very critical of the school staff, presumably the coach who dismissed these kids from the football team. And then he spoke at length, and then she signed up again to speak, and they said she couldn't because it was going to be repetitive. It was going to be the same topic. And that case ended up being decided in favor of the school board at the trial court level. It was a jury trial, and but appealed. And the Sixth Circuit largely upheld the policy, which was frivolous. What did you say? Frivolous, harassing, and repetitive. Mm-hmm. But there had been an award of attorney's fees to the school board, which got overturned. But at any rate, so that's probably where that attorney is getting that. But then later in 2021, the Sixth Circuit heard another case involving a school board out of Ohio, and they kind of clarify what they said in that 2009 case. Definitely frivolous and repetitive, was sort of agreed upon. But harassing, if it's repetitive, harassment sort of has a repetitive nature to it. But in the 2021 case, they said you cannot prevent someone from speaking in a way that offends board members or opposes board members. And so if the school board is considering harassment something that is, uncomfortable for the board members to hear, something they don't want to hear, or they feel criticized, the Sixth Circuit said, no, that is viewpoint discrimination because, hearing an opposing idea that might make you feel uncomfortable or that you disagree with, that would be viewpoint discrimination. So that harassment thing in the school board policy would have to be carefully looked at. Harassment is something that's repetitive, maybe okay to stop, but something that's just simply, negative toward the school board or its actions could fall into that impermissible viewpoint discrimination.
Got a question about, and this is implementation. We had a situation at Knoxville City Council last week where speakers signed up to speak on specific agenda items. Mm-hmm. Virtually every item on the agenda, same speakers. Wow. And what they did is they would start talking about the agenda item. For example, there was a road right-of-way closure, and then they would tie it to Gaza and start talking about Gaza. They had one was the agenda item was to revise the record-keeping schedule for the fire department. And the speaker said, yes, records for public safety agencies are very important. For example, in Gaza, the Ministry of Health has been documenting the murder of all these civilians, and with that way, and the mayor who presides over the meetings would gavel them down when they veered into that. It was obvious, in many cases, they even said, I don't know anything about this topic, but it's very important. And they would go into the Gaza thing. Obviously, it was pretty obvious that they were using that as a pretext, but is that appropriate when they're trying to use that as an example for what they that's obviously, the mayor was well within her rights and probably her responsibility to, get this person to stop talking because, like you said, it was clearly a pretext. And that's not appropriate. And there do have to be judgment calls. I think those judgment calls you have to be careful about. The person making those judgment calls needs to think about,
am I just doing this because I don't like what they're saying, or are they just off topic? But, if you allow everybody just to get up especially the same person signed up for every agenda item, I mean, that was pretty generous of the city council to let them do that. But, in my view, I don't see that often.
Well, it was the same group of people.
Different people.
Well,
in the same group.
They all spoke on several items. There wasn't one who spoke on every item.
Gotcha.
But they all had multiple. They took turns essentially.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you do something like that, you might find yourself not being allowed to speak in the future. In my view, I think governing body's going to say, you know what, in fact, there's nothing actually that prevents a governing body from asking what you're going to speak about. Are you going to speak about Gaza? Yeah. Okay. Well, so, they have to be able to, I mean, you want a forum where you can hear from the public on information that they can share with you about what you're deciding on. And I mean, you do have people who come in and just want to find a stage, and that's not really the appropriate place to find a stage. And that's something to always remember about public comment periods. And, I try to, I have given public comment at the legislature and one time at my local city council. And, I think it's important to remember that you lose credibility and credibility if you do things like that. And really, credibility is everything, right? And if you're really trying to influence someone, you need to try to do it in a way that maintains, your understanding that you need to provide information, you need to provide your perspective on an issue that the board is going to make a decision on. And I think that actually will help your chances in getting, action in your favor.
We've talked sort of mostly about the legal limits here, but of course, we all want our local governments to do more than just what they're absolutely required to do. Right. In general, in looking and thinking about public forum policies, are there, some major best practices or considerations that you recommend to people if their goal is to provide good substantive public input, but also be able to run a more or less efficient public meeting? Right. What are the things that people should be thinking about?
Right. Well, for one, it's not a bad idea to communicate in advance, both in policy, but even at the meeting, what your purpose is. Okay, now we're going into the public comment period. Everybody's going to get 3 minutes unless we ask questions or whatever. And we need you to stick to the topic because, we have business, to do. Whatever it is that tends to be a problem or has been a problem at that meeting regarding public comment, they should address it openly. They may say, we're okay with you criticizing the board in general or actions of the government, but, refrain from personally and, attacking someone and, try to keep it on actions that you can criticize actions, but, no need to criticize the individual. These are things, some of us, learn over years. So I think that's it. And also I think, we invite information that you want to give us. I mean, this is a good time to hear from you about how our policies are really being, affecting real people out there, because that is something they do need to hear. They want to hear the stories from the constituents out there about how if you do this, this is how it's going to impact me, or this is what you've done that impacts me. And those are important things for the board to hear. And that's why it's an important part of the meeting. And also, I unfortunately have heard of some governing bodies who put their public comment at the very end after they've taken items on the agenda. And that doesn't make sense. So obviously you want the public comment, before you take action on something so that the person can give you information that might be important to your decision. So, I mean, those are some things, that are practical. If you have a group of people, you mentioned people who wanted to talk about Gaza, and let's just say there was something relevant to your county or something related to Gaza. I don't know what it is, but if you have a group of people who want to talk about the same thing, you have a lot of people there, they're showing up, you're organized, and your governing body says, oh my gosh, we have 40 people who've signed up to talk about the very same topic. Well, there is an advantage of letting everybody talk who wants to talk, right? It lets them blow off. It kind of lets the steam out of the room. It doesn't get people upset. It shows respect, for viewpoints. However, from the standpoint of the people, you could also say you could also put together a petition that has 40 people on it, and then just have 5 people speak, on a different issue. And that is sort of respectful also to the governing body. So I think it's important just to think about respect on both sides, and, treating the situation or treating the meeting and the public comment period for the value that it can give, rather than just, saying everybody gets a chance to talk. But, here's what we really value to hear from you, the public.
Right. Respect on all sides. Easy to say.
Yeah. Especially when you're mad. People do get upset, and definitely. And that is human nature, right? It's human nature to get upset on these big things that are really important. I mean, if you're interested enough and upset enough or whatever to go to a public meeting, right then, you can see why things kind of boil over.
Sure. All right. Well, that's probably a good way to wrap it up. We really appreciate the overview, Deborah, and thanks for everything that TCOG does on behalf of the media in Tennessee, but also all Tennesseans. We really appreciate the work you guys do.
Thank you, Jesse. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, thanks again to Deborah for joining us. And you can find a lot of resources on the Tennessee Coalition for Open Government website if you're interested in issues of government transparency. All right. Let's look ahead to the coming week. Bunch of things on the agenda. There is the school system is having a community budget meeting at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday in the Summer Place boardroom, and this will be our first glimpse at the likely proposed school budget for the coming year, which, among other things, is going to include $39 million in new spending for a new salary schedule that the board just approved this past week. And we talked about that a few weeks ago, but that's going to increase pay for most positions in the school system, some more than others. But if you are interested in the details of the coming school budget, that will happen on Tuesday. And then, Scott, the Justice Knox group is having a meeting on Tuesday as well.
Yeah, they're having what they call their Nehemiah Action. And that is an annual get-together that they have. This is Justice Knox's coalition of 23 congregations. It's a religious association of various denominations and all, but they're very active in social justice issues. They have this every year. They invite public officials there and try to get them to pledge to do something. Of course, now they don't. It's not a blindsided thing. They all know what they're going to be doing, but they've been very active on issues around homelessness. They worked with the Office of Housing Stability to put on a homelessness summit just recently. We talked about it, and as part of that, they want the office to officially recognize them as a stakeholder and participant in discussions revolving around homelessness. And they also want County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and City Mayor Indy Kincannon to agree to make functional zero as a goal for homelessness policy. And what functional zero is that is a state where for every person who becomes homeless, one person gets housed, who is homeless gets housed. And they want them to pledge to do that, to reach that level for veterans who are homeless and for the chronically homeless. A lot of the inspiration comes from that summit when they had a consultant from Bergen County, New Jersey, who came and talked about how they achieved that.
Bergen County, New Jersey, which was just hit with an earthquake this morning.
Oh.
Sorry, that's a random event.
It is kind of random, but anyway, so that's going to be at this rally here. They're also calling on the school system to keep it reporting on discipline data,
right? Which we talked about a couple of weeks ago too.
About that too.
And what time and place is that meeting?
This is 7:30 at the Civic Auditorium. I'm sorry, 7 at the Civic Auditorium.
Okay. And then on Thursday, the Knox County Planning Commission will have its monthly meeting.
Oh yeah, it's a long agenda. Of course, a lot of things might get postponed between now and then, but they've got. It's kind of interesting when we talk about a lot of these policies and kind of issues, and you go to planning commission meetings and they're there. That's where they are. We talked about development in Choteau, an area near Farragut, that has kind of driven a lot of this anger over the growth policy plan. Well, and they shot down an affordable housing development in Choteau, and they've opposed other developments. Well, there's another Choteau development. This one's right next to Choteau Marina. It'll be interesting to see what comes of that. But there's that. There's one of the things about the growth policy plan is talked about, and that they've talked about, or about really more the comprehensive plan, but infrastructure not being, development's not being able to keep up with infrastructure. There's Scott Davis, who's a developer here, has a proposal for a subdivision of 5 dwelling units per acre in a rural area north of Carnes, and the staff of the planning staff is recommending that it only get approved for 1 unit per acre because the infrastructure won't support anything up there. So I mean, here is a lack of infrastructure. One way of looking at it, lack of infrastructure costs you 4 housing units at a time where we have a housing shortage. So that issue is playing out in real time. And in the city, it's kind of the opposite thing. They want more density. And there are a couple of items here, 2 on Middlebrook Pike, another one in Amherst, where they're all zoned for low density residential. They're going to be considering jacking that up to medium density residential so they can build apartments and townhouses on them that they couldn't in low density areas. So all of these issues are playing out, and they'll all play out next Thursday.
All right. And then also on Thursday, of course, we mentioned earlier in the episode, the Farragut Board of Mayor and Aldermen is meeting, and this is where they will consider rescinding that prior vote and then possibly going ahead and voting on and for the new growth plan. So that is happening. If you don't feel like driving out to Farragut and dealing with all of that traffic, you can go down to the City County building, because City Council is also having a workshop on Thursday.
Yeah, City Council is having a workshop on Thursday. Not nearly as controversial is that one. That
maybe nobody will storm out of it.
I doubt it. It's going to be a workshop on the things that the city is doing to streamline the development process. They've been doing, they're getting new software, they're adding positions, they're doing a lot of different things to try to make it easier and quicker to get plans developed and that sort of thing, or plans approved and that sort of thing. So that's what this workshop is. It's a very, very nuts and bolts workshop.
Yeah, Thursday's a good day. If you're into real wonky stuff, you could spend Thursday. It's sort of like Thursday's like the big ears of local land use policy, because you can spend all afternoon at the planning commission, and then you have your choice. It's like one of those conflicts you have during big ears. Do I go to Farragut where they're dealing with the growth plan, or do I go to city council where they're talking about development processes and everything? So you get your pick there. And before we close out here, there is something else happening next weekend too, and we are going to bring in very special guest and our producer, Lord Seth Barber, to tell us about Holleroo. Seth, what is happening in Happy Holler this coming weekend?
All right, so Saturday, the 13th, all day long, we're shutting down the street. We're going to do a soapbox derby.
For people not familiar, what street are you talking about?
Oh, I apologize. Happy Holler, it's the intersection of Central and Anderson, kind of between Baxter and Woodlawn. Number of businesses in the area, been there for a while. We're kind of new to the neighborhood. We got the neighbors together. We wanted to put on a show, have a good time, get the Holler back on the map as we've been kind of working as a goal, I suppose. So yeah, like I said, soapbox derby. We've got at least a dozen drivers so far. We've got a few more people that are trying to see if they can get a car built in time to come and race down that hill there. Shouldn't be any significant carnage, but I'm hoping for at least one wreck. It's not a good race if somebody doesn't end up on the side, or their car ends up upside down or something like that. And then we're doing a street fair all day. It's kind of two waves of street fair. We're going to have part of it going all day, and then we're going to have more add in after the derby wraps up. So we'll have all essential covered up, and jewelry and soaps and all sorts of fun different stuff. A bunch of different food people are coming down, as well as all the restaurants and bars that are already there that have food. And then we're going to wrap up the day with a sweet free outdoor concert. I forgot the whole free on all of this stuff all the way down. It's free all day. Just find a place to park. There shouldn't be any paid parking. It should all be free parking for that matter too. I just come down and hang out. But we've got Sariena, Dos Fuegos, and Dishwater Blonde performing. I'm obliged to thank Astria Farms, Coors Banquet, Pacifico, and Brown Foreman for helping us get the top level of the sponsorship to help us put all the parts and pieces together, because I knew it would be expensive, but these things are quite a project to put together.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts.
Takes a lot of people and a decent amount of funds to put something like this together. But for me, it's the Holler has always been there, kind of as it is. It's never had a real heyday, if you will, except for maybe way back in the early years,
back when it earned its name, Happy Holler.
Right. And so it's had a checkered history since, I suppose. And for me and the other business owners down there that are, we're trying to make it a good, fun place to come do business and be entertained and enjoy some nightlife that isn't downtown proper, or the old city. To me, like, I love the stadium thing. We can argue about the politics of how it's getting there. That's a whole separate thing, but I love the idea. But to me, the old city used to be kind of the alternative night spot.
Funky, cool hangout.
There we go. And I think it's already starting to transition and will continue a transition into being a little bit more highbrow than I think some people like it. So we want to fill that gap, I guess, is what we're chasing with that. So we're never going to be.
So you're shooting for the
nice.
Lowbrow.
Mid-brow.
It's mid-brow. Okay.
Right. And again, it's Old North Knox. It's a great neighborhood as far as the actual neighbors that live down there. I've been in constant communication with that neighborhood group, trying to make sure that they're on board and okay with everything, and they're really excited about it.
How did you get the city to close the street?
I don't know. Phone calls and emails and paperwork. Lots of paperwork. Which is fun for me. If you guys have heard me on this show, if you've heard my podcast, Almost in Agreement, I have a little bit too much fun going in the deep dive of the weirdness that is the politics and the governance and all that kind of stuff. And so, there's a lot of people I've already met through this and my show. So it's a lot of connections, it's a lot of networking. But you just got to fill out the right paperwork and pay the fees, and you can get it done.
All right. And what are the hours that this is running?
Official start time's 10 a.m. That's when the first set of vendors will start opening up. The Derby's going to start around noon, and then the concert will start around 5.
All right. Well, that's so if we want to watch the carnage, as you put it, and anytime after
the mild carnage.
Okay. And but it sounds like. You guys are just wanting to put on a big party for anybody who wants to come to Happy Holler.
Yeah, well, like it's an attempt to put the spotlight on this neighborhood particularly, and the businesses that are down there trying to do the best they can. And there's fun. Like the history of the neighborhood's really neat if you actually go down the rabbit hole on it. We have a ghost. We're pretty sure in our building. We assume it's Brownie. He's the only person that's name is written on the wall in the back, hidden somewhere. And I've asked around about some of the different historical people around town on if they know who that might be. But it's like it's a 140-something-year-old building that we're in that hasn't had at least much change, at least on the outside, in that whole time. So,
and probably saw a lot of interesting things happen because people who don't know the history of Happy Holler, the reason it's called Happy Holler is that this was for many years a sort of notorious night spot full of dive bars and various kinds of trouble that people could get into. Yeah. And I never knew it in those days because I moved to Knoxville in the 1990s, and by then, at that point, a lot of those buildings were empty or they were junk shops. There was not a lot going on over there.
It's the North Knoxville version of Friendly Town.
Right.
If
exactly.
People, nobody remembers Friendly Town, but because if you were around, then you're dead now. But call up Jack Neely and ask him about Friendly.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think that's part of it. I think there is some stigma to the neighborhood that needs to get washed off. And that's part of what we're chasing here. Is we're trying to get some of the mid-recent history that people think of when they think of the Holler to kind of get cleaned off a little bit, because it has some dark times and there was very, very sparsely populated with anything or anybody, at least not anything or anybody most people want to interact with.
Right. Make the Holler happy again.
Yep, that's one of the catchphrases.
Well, sounds great. And as a relatively local resident myself, I'll certainly wander over and check it out. Wish you all the best with the Holleroo. All right. Well, we will be back here next week in one form or another to talk about anything that happens between now and then. And hope everybody's having a good weekend. Our theme music is by Will Wright. Thanks to Lord Seth Barber for his production assistance. We'll talk to you next week.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost in Agreement. Almost in Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostinagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.